This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you for joining us. On this episode, we'll be speaking with Bob Buster. He is a member of the Board of Supervisors in Riverside County. We'll also be speaking with two members of the Riverside City Council. We'll get to them later on in the program. But first, sir, I want to speak with you about an issue that impacts the entire state, and that is prisons. As you know, we have 58 counties, and Governor Brown recently signed a law which changes the way that we incarcerate low-level offenders. It was in response to a U.S. Supreme Court decision that called California prisons inhumane. Right. Explain to us what the new prison scheme does.
Well, from our county's perspective, it may have transferred some of these low-level state offenders to our jails, but our jails are nearly full. So what we've seen is after the normal release of a state prisoner that would be overseen by state parole, that offender is now being overseen by county probation.
But here's the key. This is not a county program. This was not a county decision. This was a state law that was implemented in response to the U.S. Supreme Court demanding that California prisons decrease their prison load.
Right. I mean, the counties really had little options in the matter. And so we're trying to deal with it as best we can. And so far, I think people are safer now under county probation. They have a much closer association with the community, and I think their reoffense rate is something like 17%. Whereas, as we know,
dramatic.
Yeah, California parolees, now many of those are more serious offenders. They have about a 70% rate.
So what we are saying, and it's a little complicated, but there are state prisons and county jails. Right. And so it's these low-level offenders that would have gone to state prison are now going to county jails.
That's correct. For any offenses that are being tried since the law was passed, then if they do fall into this category where they're non-sexual offenders, they're non-violent, they're non-serious, then they go to the county jails.
Here's the challenge, though, and that is the intent had been that anyone who was subject to a sentence of more than 3 years, that's really not non-serious, and they should go to the state system. But through enhancements, we are seeing some, quote, low-level offenders getting sentences that are 10, 15 years. County jails really aren't equipped for those types of sentences.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been some remedial legislation offered to deal with those circumstances. Our district attorney has been involved in it, our sheriff's been involved in it, and our probation department. And I'll expect to see there will be some adjustments in those cases.
One of the biggest fears of all counties is that this state mandate would get passed, and then the state would eliminate funding to allow the counties to maintain these prisoners. Because in the first part of this cycle, the last 9 months essentially, what started in October I should say, there was funding set aside to the counties. What Governor Brown is saying is he wants to make sure that the counties do receive that funding in perpetuity, and he has a tax initiative on the ballot come November. And that initiative would increase taxes on the wealthiest among us, as well as for 7 years, and then as well as increase sales tax for 4 years. Part of that money would go to counties for prisons. What's your sense of that initiative? Some DAs have come out in favor of it. What about Supervisor Buster?
Well, I'd wanted to see more reforms at the state level with their own pension systems in exchange for more taxes. We haven't seen that yet. Maybe we will. We are seeing Governor Brown call for reduced time by 5% that state employees would work to try to save money.
That's part of the recent budget crisis.
I think that there will be a combination of things that are needed at the state level, both in cuts, both in revamping and restructuring their pay.
At this stage, you're undecided on the initiative. You want to see what happens.
Yeah, I want to see what the state is doing additionally. But guarantees for this funding are are critical. I mean, because of the state's dire situation, it's critical we continue to receive the adequate funding.
You mentioned pensions, and we know that Riverside County is one of the early counties in our state to enter into a pension reform scheme that ultimately was approved by many of your unions. I know there was some contention, but be that as it may, there is some pension reform. That being said, the county is still facing a deficit, about $23 million. And the county has announced that about 225, 230 people will be laid off. Talk to me about that decision and how the layoffs will occur.
Well, our staff is going through the process of prioritization of those layoffs. We think we can minimize the impacts of those on services to the public and on the employees as well.
They are people.
Well, we were already reduced the number quite substantially through our pension reform measures that save us at least $55 million.
So it would have been worse, but for pension reform.
It would have been considerably worse.
We do know that the county did operate a redevelopment agency, and the agency did have a staff. We know the state eliminated redevelopment. So might that be a place where, again, these are people, but where a chunk of the layoffs could occur?
Strangely enough, that's true. They're redevelopment employees. Some are losing their jobs. At the same time, the state's funding that they're giving to our counties for the prison low-level offenders realignment, as they call it, we're adding jobs. We're hiring new people under probation.
Yes, I understand. I also want to get a sense of whether these layoffs were needed. And the reason I ask that is, yes, we do forecast a budget deficit in Riverside County. But we also know that this county is starting to see some improvements in the economy, and they are palpable and they are demonstrable. So what I'm wondering, sir, is I hate to say it, but could you roll the dice and wait to see if the recovery continues? Because if it does, maybe you don't need to lay off those people.
Yeah, I don't like to see layoffs. In fact, that was one of the big pushes behind our pension reforms and internal adjustments so that we could minimize the human toll of taking people out of jobs, many of whom are well-trained, doing a great job, and in functions that we want to preserve.
I mean, think about it. There was the annual State of the Region Conference in April. I think it was in Ontario. I presume that you were present, and the numbers were really quite pleasing. There was a prediction the Inland Empire would see job gains 5 times greater than 2011. Now, it's still small numbers because 2011 was so dismal, but really, I mean,
we're doing all we can. I mean, those look like hopeful changes for our revenue picture, but I think it'll be a slow thing. And our board, we're trying to push on the investments that bring us more jobs as quickly as possible. One of the areas, we've gotten some major transportation projects underway that will hire thousands of people over the next few years.
We also know that next door in San Bernardino County, they're about to get an Amazon distribution center. I mean, that's pretty significant, and I would presume that will have positive impacts throughout the entire Inland Empire.
Yeah, I mean, we see some real bright spots. In my district, a plastics company has increased its workforce from 200 to over 500 employees in just the last year. We're going to be opening a new UC Riverside Medical School next year.
Let it be. Are we really going to be opening it? We're waiting for accreditation. I mean, are you confident? I do want to ask you.
I'm confident this time. I think our dean and our university, our chancellor know what they're doing. They've gotten the adequate funding for the next 10 years.
Is the state stepping up to the plate? I know it's a different formula, but are we getting the state support we need?
The state, under the auspices of the University of California, is stepping up to the plate, such that, and our county is stepping up to the plate. And
that $10 million?
Yeah, for the next 10 years. The school now has guaranteed funding of at least $10 million a year.
That's very significant. Okay, I want to thank you so much for joining us on California Edition. When we come back, we will be speaking with 2 members of the Riverside City Council. I know Mr. Buster knows them well. We'll be speaking with Mike Gardner as well as Nancv Hart. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition.
California includes 58 counties. In terms of population, where does Riverside County land in rank? 4th, 6th, 7th, or 9th? According to the 2010 census, Riverside is the fourth most populated county in California, with 2,189,641 residents.
Welcome back to California Edition. This is Mike Gardner. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. And sir, we just spoke with Bob Buster, who's a county supervisor in Riverside. And I want to get a sense from you, like we did with him, about your sense of the state of the economy in Riverside, in the Inland Empire.
Or the economy is beginning to turn. We're seeing some increase in sales tax, and increase in property tax value will follow that. It typically lags by a year going down and coming up as the economy changes. But I think we're seeing encouraging signs. The inland economy was so based on single-family home construction that when the economy changed and that died, it hurt us worse than many other areas.
And I want to talk to you about that, and so many of our viewers are watching throughout the state. So if you can really paint a picture for us, because when we think about the Inland Empire, home values have dropped in the Dual County area 50, 60% since 2006. I mean, this is literally the bottom falling out.
It is, and in 2006, 2007, the Riverside-San Bernardino metropolitan area was the fastest growing area in the country.
Right. Now, what about the city of Riverside itself? Because when we think about the poster children of the foreclosure crisis, for example, it really more is the high desert. Was Riverside as a city impacted as dramatically as Hesperia, Victorville, for example?
No, not as badly, although we do have far more foreclosures and vacant properties than we would like to have, but it's not as bad as other areas.
Now, as I'm sure you know, Riverside San Bernardino continues to be in the top 10 cities hardest hit by the foreclosure crisis nationwide. So the crisis is not over. But let's talk about jobs, though, because obviously, how do you avoid foreclosure? You have a well-paying job, or a job that will allow you to pay your mortgage. I recently read a report from the State of the Region Conference, which was held in Ontario in April. And some prognosticators indicated their view that job growth would increase 5 times in the IE as compared to last year. Now, it's 5 times of a small number, but still.
We are seeing growth in jobs in existing companies as well as companies coming to the area. The region has a lot to offer. Geographically, we're centrally located from a transportation perspective. Freeway and rail networks are very good. It's a generally nice place to live. The weather is good, and it's physically close to the mountains and the desert and the coast and all those things that people like.
What's interesting about Riverside and San Bernardino counties is the 2 main cities, Riverside and San Bernardino, are only 20 minutes apart.
They are.
People may not realize that. And I bring that point up because, as I'm sure you know, as part of Amazon.com's agreement with the state to allow the state to pass sales tax through internet sales, they are opening 2 distribution centers in our state. One in San Bernardino.
Yes, which is wonderful for them.
But also, isn't it wonderful for the region?
Yeah, anything that helps any of the cities in the region benefits the region.
Because as I understand it, 1,000 permanent jobs will be created. I mean, this is what this region needs desperately.
But more importantly for the city of San Bernardino, which is in desperate financial condition, the sales tax that will generate is a huge boost to them, and having one of our cities do better makes the region do better.
And arguably, San Bernardino was harder hit than the city of Riverside.
Oh, I don't think it's an argument at all. I think it's a fact.
Yeah, okay, so you mentioned rail. And I want to get a sense from you about the importance of rail to this region. You know, we're not that far from the coast. We're in Riverside today. We're not that far from the coast. We don't realize 50 miles maybe. And at the ports of LA and Long Beach, huge amounts of cargo come in. I mean, those are the 2 largest ports in the world. And so how important are those ports to the health of this region?
They have 2 effects. One is negative. All of the traffic that goes in and out of the port arrives at the port on trains, and almost all of that goes through our region and creates problems. You have air quality problems and you have traffic problems.
On that, no?
Working hard on it. In Riverside, we've created several separations of train traffic from motor vehicle traffic, and there are more coming. But this region is something of a logistics capital because of its location. And
distribution centers.
Yes, exactly. And
we've spoken of some that have opened in the last year or so.
There are several large ones that have opened. There's a new one that is just going to break ground over near the former March Air Force Base. It's now a reserve base.
Of course.
And the city of Moreno Valley, one of our neighboring cities, is proposing or there is a proposal within the city for 42 million square feet of warehouse and distribution center space.
It's a huge number, and just the job growth we need.
Right.
Speaking of rail, I must ask you about high-speed rail. I know you're involved, for example, on the Seismic Safety Commission, and so you have taken a more statewide view as a member of the Riverside City Council. High-speed rail was passed by the voters a few years back. There has been some trepidation about the cost of high-speed rail, but let's talk from a parochial sense. As a representative of the Inland Empire, how do you feel about high-speed rail?
It's one of those things that you would love to have in place, but actually getting it there is a very painful process. If we are to have high-speed rail, I very much would like to see a stop here in our region, and I'm sure there will be one. There are two primary.
Will we be alive when there is one? That's the question.
You and I, maybe not,
right,
Brad. But,
exactly.
Having a stop nearby is important for any significant transportation method.
Now, at this stage, I don't think there's an IE stop scheduled. Am I correct?
Well, they're looking at two possible routes going to Los Angeles from San Diego. One goes through Corona to the south of Riverside.
I see.
One comes through Riverside. They basically parallel two different freeways.
Right.
The Interstate 15 and Interstate 215.
And what's interesting, in Orange County, there was tremendous contention about whether there should be a stop. Some absolutely wanted it, others absolutely did not. And in the final analysis, it wound up that they added the stop back in Anaheim.
Right.
So, but we still don't know. I mean, there's a lot of concern about whether there's the funding there. The state legislature is still a little queasy about it. I also want to talk to you about Ontario Airport.
Yes.
Of course, a sister city in the Inland Empire. It's really, what, 15 minutes away?
It's about 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
right
from
there.
Downtown Riverside
It's
to
right
the terminals at Ontario.
So, of course, it impacts the city of Riverside as well as the entire region. I'm sure you know that Ontario has become a source of contention because Ontario, unlike Long Beach, unlike Burbank, is actually part of LA World Airports.
Right.
And there are many folks who believe that it is the ugly stepchild, that LA World Airports doesn't treat it like it should. How do you feel about Ontario Airport?
Well, Ontario is the regional airport for inland Southern California. And it's very important to our region for people to get in and out of, to try to bring business here because they want people to be able to get here easily.
But the problem is passenger traffic is down dramatically, 1/3.
It is.
And so that begs the question, is it down because of poor management? Or is it down because the region was hit so terribly?
I wouldn't call it poor management, I would call it intentional management. It's down partly because of the economy, there's no question. Air travel nationwide is down. But I think LAWA, LA World Airways, has intentionally structured travel in and out of Ontario in a way that drives more flights to Los Angeles International Airport. And it's not bad management if you're Los Angeles. It's smart management.
So Ontario is looking to take over the airport. The city is looking to take it over. Obviously, you don't have a say in that, but what do you think?
Well, there is a coalition of regional cities and the two counties, Riverside and San Bernardino County. And my city is among that coalition, and we are arguing that Ontario should operate that airport rather than Los Angeles.
That's bold. That is very bold. And I know that the city of Los Angeles is actually studying the possibility.
There is some sympathy. It could happen.
It could happen. Okay, his name is Mike Gardner. He's a member of the Riverside City Council. When we come back, we'll be speaking with one of Mike's colleagues. Her name is Nancv Hart. We'll be right back on California Edition.
Who is the largest employer in the city of Riverside? The County of Riverside, Riverside Community Hospital, Riverside Unified School District, or the University of California at Riverside? The University of California at Riverside employs 6,740 people.
Welcome back to California Edition. Our guest now is Nancv Hart. As I said, she's a member of the Riverside City Council. And earlier in the program, Councilwoman, we spoke with Bob Buster, who is a supervisor in Riverside County, as well as one of your colleagues, Mike Gardner, who sits on the Riverside City Council with you. And we've been speaking about the city of Riverside, the county of Riverside, the Inland Empire, which, as you know, has been so hard hit by this economic crisis. We read the same papers, we talk to the same people, and what they are saying is that it's starting to turn around. But Councilwoman, you're in the field. You know, you're talking to constituents. Do they feel like it's turning around?
I think some of them are finding jobs. Some of them are finding work. There are new companies coming to the city all the time. And there for a while, nobody was coming anywhere.
Right.
Nobody was moving. Nobody was picking up stakes and making up and doing new buildings. And now we see a little more of that. There were some redevelopment projects that I thought were going to go by the wayside because redevelopment got pulled. And
let's talk about redevelopment, if we may, because as you mentioned, the California legislature and the governor voted to eliminate redevelopment, and the California Supreme Court upheld that elimination. There had been some hope that the legislature, in conjunction with the governor, would come back and create some new version of redevelopment. But with the recent numbers on the budget deficit, $16 billion, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. In fact, the governor is counting on even more of the redevelopment dollars to flow back to Sacramento. So redevelopment is gone. Is it as dramatic a loss as we thought it was going to be, at least in the short term? Then we can talk about the long term.
To me, in Riverside, it's a dramatic loss. There were things that we really needed to get done, wanted to get done, are not going to get done, or they're going to be put on hold for a good long while. Now that redevelopment's gone, we're going to have to get rid of property that we had kind of tried to bank for a better time so that we could find someone to put a really good project somewhere.
And I do want to ask you about that, because under the law that eliminated the redevelopment agencies, it states very clearly that the successor agency to cities' redevelopment agencies must sell off the property.
Right.
But the question is, how quickly do they have to do that? Because prices are just starting to come back, and I would hope, you know, cities could make a little profit off these properties.
And that, to me, is one of the stumbling blocks. I think they should have spread it out over a little bit longer period of time. First of all, it takes time to assemble properties. It takes time to find someone who wants to put the project that you think is appropriate for that area. Riverside's in a position right now, a kind of a little classier position than we used to be in. So now when we go and look for a developer, we go and look for a restaurant or a business.
But do you even have time to try to find a developer? You have no incentives because, as I understand it, under the law, the cities have to sell the properties.
They do have to sell it, but I don't think they have to sell it quite that quickly.
And that's the question.
I mean, there's some time, but there's not a lot of time. But I also think that developers are out there knowing we're in that position. And so when we send out a request for proposal, in one instance, I was looking for something to do Camp Anza, rehabilitate Camp Anza.
Which is where for our...
And I thought it was a dead project because I knew that a lot of money was going to be redevelopment money. And as it turned out, we requested 4, we got, one and got 4 back.
Wow.
I was just more than thrilled. I was more than thrilled because it gives you scope and it gives you an opportunity to choose, not just take whatever somebody wants to bring.
So given that Riverside, the city, arguably used redevelopment so effectively, especially during this economic downturn, what can Riverside City do now without that tool?
Well, we're gonna have to either use something like home funds, or we're gonna have to find developers who are not going to be as needy of those funds.
Do you have any enterprise zones in the city?
Yes, out in the business community and out by March and a few places like that.
You can use
and
that
those
tool.
Those businesses are happy to come to our area. We have a lot to offer a business that is high tech or needs lots of water, lots of electricity. We have our own utility. That really makes a difference.
I want to go back to the economy. We know that many of these projects, whether they were brought to the city through redevelopment or not, created jobs. I mean, they were big job creators. And it was this region that was so hard hit with the unemployment crisis. I mean, at one point, unemployment in the Inland Empire not too long ago was 15%, and it still is pretty high, 12-ish%. But there was a conference recently, the State of the Region Conference in Ontario in April, and some economists said that job growth would really pick up 5 times more than last year, as I mentioned earlier in the program. Now, it's still 5 times of a small number, but is that what you see?
I see up as opposed to down, which to me is a plus.
Sure.
When I talk to someone at say at the Galleria, shops are opening. We have a new Skechers that just opened.
Right.
Things like that would not have been here probably a while back. And now that you see shopping centers filling as opposed to everything being empty. And it's still going to take a while though, because I think there are other places that maybe have more incentive money-wise or whatever, or they're willing to settle for something less than what we want.
I want to also ask you about housing, because you also know, as I spoke with Mr. Gardner, this region was hammered by the foreclosure crisis, and Riverside San Bernardino still is in the top 10 nationwide in foreclosures. I know that the city of Riverside wasn't as hard hit as the county or the region generally, but how are housing prices? How is the stock? Is it turning around?
I know that I have 2 developments getting ready to start.
Really?
They're going through planning right now, just in my ward alone.
That is huge.
That's huge.
Construction was massacred the last few years.
Right, and one is low-income housing for groups and families, but one is also a market rate out on Magnolia Avenue around the Magnolia Freeway.
How is that happening?
It's happening with private money. It's happening with money that was financed back a ways. It's happening with developers who have their own money and also have good ties and good relationships with banking, because then the bankers are willing to loan because they've loaned to these people before, and these are people that are not going to sell their property off. They're going to stay and own this property forever, which gives me peace, because it tells me that I have a developer in there who cares about the community and is not going to let his property run down.
I want to ask you about UC Riverside. I know it's not your ward, but you are one of the biggest boosters of the city of Riverside generally. And for a few years, there's been a huge push to create a medical school at UC Riverside. Unfortunately, accreditation was denied because of a lack of state funding. But we know that efforts are being made to guarantee accreditation so the school will open in fall of 2013. How are you feeling, Madam Councilwoman, about that possibility?
You know, I'm very disappointed in the legislature, period.
Okay, well,
period.
Yeah. Join the team.
Period.
Right.
Because it's such a need. But I also am very proud of Dr. Olds, who's just,
the dean?
Wow, he's just out there pulling money from here and there and everywhere. Right. And why the state will not respect the idea that we're willing to put our own money in.
The county, I believe, is giving $10 million a year.
Exactly. And there's a lot of private donors that are willing to come in. And so why they're still requiring the state to do what they have to do, or what they want the state to do, I just feel like they're trying to tie our hands for no reason.
But do you feel as if it's going to happen?
Boy, man.
I mean, there's no doubt that they are persistent.
They are.
And they are working diligently to make sure, because as
everything's in place. Right. That's the sad thing. Everything's in place. All the next years and all the labs and everything is ready to go. The nurses' school, the things there. I mean, everything is ready to go. We need it. Well, that ought to be enough.
I'm glad I had a chance to speak with Supervisor Buster, Councilman Gardner, as well as yourself, Councilwoman Nancy Hart of Riverside. It does seem as if the better days are ahead.
All on the same page.
No doubt. Better days ahead for the Inland Empire. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching California Edition.